want to get into your great piece on Biden's legacy, but first I want to start by asking, there's been an update since we last spoke. Kamala is now the what looks like might be the nominee. Are you more hopeful that she has a chance than you were a couple weeks ago, or do you think it's still highly unlikely given her, despite her surge?
I'm a little bit more hopeful that she has a chance. I think she has got name recognition, and that's good. People know the name of Kamala Harris. She's got the problem that she's really, her political style is very oriented toward, being like a city DA kind of person. And, she didn't do very well in the 2020 primary. But, she might have been practicing since then, hopefully. And she's been keeping a low profile as vice president. And so, we'll get to see. Betting markets give her about a 1 in 3 chance to win. And 1 in 3 is not nothing. That's not an insignificant chance at all. It's not saying that Trump is the overwhelming favorite in the betting markets or in, election forecasts. And, you have to remember that Trump is now the old guy in the race, right? He's very old. He's 79, or not 79? Yeah, 79, I think. And he's visibly going downhill. Like he's not, Biden has gone downhill more, but I would say that Trump is probably looks worse than Biden did in 2020. Biden went downhill during his presidency. The stress of the presidency does age you, everybody. And I think it aged Trump the first time too, pretty visibly. And, I think that people are going to see that. Trump rambles a lot, his acceptance speech. Remember in 2016, remember that acceptance speech at the convention? It was very fire. It was like, only I can save America. It was this very like, some people got freaked out by it. A lot of people got energized by it. It was this very sort of like Sturm und Drang kind of thing. And his convention speech this time was rambly, honestly. And it was less fiery. It was more like speaking to a rally, touching on a whole bunch of inside things, that he knew that he would think that about, making references to things that regular people don't necessarily know. It wasn't a bad speech. It's clear that he's not going to be a Hitler. Like if it wasn't clear before, it's clear, now Trump 2 is not going to be any more Hitler than Trump 1 was. That's silly. But he's also, he's a divisive figure. He's old. He's not amazingly good at creating policies. Like, he was good at shaking up the economic consensus of the country when, changing our ideas from, on China and trade and things like that, and getting people worried about, the working class again. And he did all those things. Those are important. And then on policies, he signed off on some very good policies, like the CARES Act. But honestly, like he didn't really like come up with many ideas. He had the tax cuts, fine. Really, those were, it was like, I guess the Heritage Foundation or somebody who I forget who came up with those. And, he just signed off on it. And his signature ideas, let's yell at people until they build a factory in Wisconsin. His first round of tariffs was not very effectual. And so he's not going to be very effectual. And so I think that Trump is now the old guy who will just like bumble around in the race, And I think it's going to take people a while to get used to that. But Harris is, I think, to some degree a cipher. She's on economic policy. It's not very clear what she wants to do. Her policy proposals in the, 2020 primary were all very incremental stuff. It was much, Biden did all this bold sweeping stuff of like industrial policy. I don't think Harris is necessarily interested in that, but I think that, there's a good chance that she may continue it. I'm sure she'll shake up the team, but I think that, I don't think she's going to cancel the export controls on China or reverse the, CHIPS Act or something like that. I think that her fundamental lack of focus on economic policy means that we'll largely see the same stuff we saw under Biden, which is doing pretty well with the exception of deficits. So what Kamala Harris thinks about the deficit and what Trump thinks about the deficit is something that ought to come out in the debates, and I hope it does, because it's an important issue that nobody's really facing yet.
Yeah. Let's, and as we learn more about Kamala in the next month or two, we'll chat about what we see as the biggest differences between her and a Biden presidency should she win. But first, let's get into in this episode. Let's talk about your Biden legacy piece, because I think it's interesting to just talk about the legacies of presidents in general. Right after they finish, there's a perspective that people have, and then decades later, they're often are often remembered differently based on how the future has turned out or how their policies look in retrospect. And some presidents get a short shrift right after or are underrated right after they finish, and it feels like you think Biden is someone who is likely to be or is currently underrated. We're not appreciating sort of how great he is. You tweeted that you think he's the best president of your lifetime or of our lifetime. So
I think so.
Let's get into that case.
I think other presidents, a number of other presidents were just fine. George H.W. Bush was a great, I was technically alive for him, although I don't remember him very well. And I was actually alive for Reagan a little bit. But then, I actually think Reagan's underrated. And I think that George H.W. Bush is massively underrated. I think that Bill Clinton is a little bit overrated, but still pretty good. I think that Barack Obama is probably appropriately rated and pretty good. These are not bad presidents. We have not had a run of bad presidents, right? We had George W. Bush, who I think did the Iraq War, which is a giant mistake. Tax cuts were unhelpful. Shipping jobs to China, financial, he didn't pay attention to the China shock. He didn't pay attention to financial problems. He just paid attention to like terrorism and stuff and screwed a lot of it up. George W. Bush was a bad president. And I think Donald Trump was a bad president simply because of his effect on institutional trust and, just social unity. I think that, the country is more than just a set of policies, right? We're also a nation that has to think of ourselves as a unified nation in order to function. I think Trump impaired that, while his actual policies didn't do a lot. Although I think that Trump had, there were positive aspects to his presidency too, changed our thinking on a lot of things. Ultimately, I would rather not have had him in the White House for that time because I had to go through the 2010s. I would rather not have him there again. So when Biden, when I say Biden's the best president of my lifetime, what I really mean is that he faced challenges that he rose to. So who gets to be the best is largely a function of who, faced challenges. There's lots of presidents that came along in fairly tranquil times that won't get remembered as the best or the worst because there wasn't a lot going on then, as much going on. There's always a lot going on, at the level of a nation, but there wasn't as much. So, Biden had this big challenge of COVID and the, COVID recession recovery. And he handled that so well, we forgot about it, right? Like by 2023, no one talked about COVID. People were like, COVID, what? But in 2021, it was what everyone was talking about. COVID was the thing, like that still dominated our society in many ways. And so the fact that it went away, of course, is not, it's pandemics naturally go away, after they kill a bunch of people. But Biden hastened it on its way in a few ways. One was by a very, very good vaccine rollout that vaccinated pretty much everyone who wanted to get vaccinated, including a number of people who would later claim, like, I was tricked into taking the vaccine. No, you weren't. You were scared of the virus, right? And now you're saying you don't believe in vaccines so you can have more friends online. Well, nice for you, but you were scared and you took the vaccine because vaccines work and they're pretty safe. And so, I mean, it was the vaccine rollout went well, and that helped save a lot of lives, and it helped turn COVID into just a cold. Obviously when you're vaccinated, you can still get COVID, but it'll be more like just a cold than this really like serious thing that screws you up. And so that's one thing Biden did. And another thing Biden did was he said, look, in like 2022, he stood up there and said, look, the pandemic's over. That's done. We're out of that pandemic. And that exerted this immense psychological influence on progressives, on liberals, on Democrats, who make up half the country roughly, and for whom COVID was turning into this sort of like permanent lifestyle. And for some people it still did, like Taylor Lorenz, or some people they're like, how dare you go to this event without a mask? And like right now, they say that right now. Of course, then they go to events without masks. It's a bit performative. It became this sort of COVID dead ending became this sort of permanent subculture, right? On the right, you had people go nuts by like just going crazy about vaccines. And on the left, you had people go nuts by thinking like COVID has turned us into this permanent, like, fortress society. And it's all fantasy, right? It's fantasy on both sides. But Americans have become very attached to like willful fantasy. And we found that if we can get a number of similar, like-minded people online together and all chant the fantasy at the same time, it seems more real to us. It's like a magic spell. If we just chant like the pandemic's still happening, the pandemic's still happening with our friends, with 5 or 6 other people on Twitter, then it's real. Then it's then you made it real. You chanted the spell. Or like vaccines don't work, then okay, I guess now they don't work because you said it with 5 other RFK supporters or whatever. Like we've become a nation of fantasy, but Biden pricked that fantasy. He was like, no, I'm the guy in charge of the Democrats. I am king liberal, and I say the pandemic's over. And that was the real actual moment when the pandemic ended. There's no epidemiological or scientific definition of when a pandemic ends. It's sociological. Biden said it's over, and it was over. And Trump couldn't have done that, right? Because like COVID dead enders didn't listen to Trump.
I remember the vaccine coming out right after Biden took over, and some people saying, "Oh, did they hold it because they didn't want Trump to get credit for it?" Do you remember this? And is there some truth to that? Or
I do, but I think that they didn't have that level of fine control over it. Like, I mean, this was a vast machinery made of many, a ton of different actors, manufacturers, distributors, government agencies, and the companies themselves. First of all, there were multiple companies. First of all, look at when it came out in other countries. Like, nobody was withholding or accelerating vaccines in other countries because of Trump, right? There were a couple countries like Israel where people were getting vaccinated before we did, but mostly they got vaccinated after we did. We mostly got it before anybody else. And the companies, did they withhold the vaccine until, I think that kind of decision would have to be made at the very top. It would have to be a very big conspiracy, right? It would have to be made at the top levels. There would have had to have been a bunch of people secretly talking to each other and saying, let's withhold this vaccine until too late so that Trump, doesn't get reelected. And I think, while I can't tell you, oh, that could never happen, I'm not just going to scoff at that. I'd say that I think we would have heard about it. I think it would have leaked. I think that far smaller and milder conspiracies leak all the time, every day. It's very difficult to keep that kind of dramatic thing a secret. So I'm pretty doubtful that kind of thing happened. Also, if they had wanted to sandbag, I think that their level of fine control over when the vaccine came out was relatively limited, because these policies are sort of like, all these decisions are made well in advance, and of like when we're going to roll it out, when we're going to do these things, and very little is decided on the spot. These things are decided months before. So I think they would have, if they had tried to sandbag, they would have sandbagged more. We would have seen it be later in the Biden presidency. We would have seen pretty visible effects of the United States lagging other countries in terms of getting this vaccine out. Sandbagging would have had to be more major sandbagging. In other words, does that make any sense?
Yeah, I understand. I want to compare Biden and Trump's first term on a few different axes to better understand the Biden legacy. Let's and we talked about how there's some continuations that are, but let's go deeper. Let's talk about the economy. And you outline a little bit about a few angles in your Biden post. Let's get into that.
Well, the economy has been good in terms of jobs and growth since Obama's second term. So around 2013, we transitioned from this post-Great Recession economy into an economy that's been very solid. Like we've seen wages grow for people at the bottom of the income distribution, for low-wage workers. We've seen wealth grow again. We've seen, and for normal people, not just for the rich people, and in fact a little more for normal people than for the rich. We've seen balanced, equitable growth that was pretty fast, not super fast because we're a developed country, obviously, but fast for us. We've seen steady, balanced, equitable growth at a decent clip, and we saw that in Obama's second term, and we saw that in Trump's term, and we have seen that in Biden's as well. Obviously, again, the big weird thing is COVID and stuff like that. The disruption that came from that, which affected Trump, the last year of Trump and the first year or maybe 2 years of Biden. But I'd say that at least the first year. In terms of employment and growth, it didn't really do much. Inflation was the big thing that changed. That's the big difference between Trump's second term and Biden's first term was inflation.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Today, I want to make a bit of a personal appeal to anyone working on a SaaS app or website. If you spend any time on the internet, you probably have interacted with chatbots in the bottom right corner of sites. Most are really annoying. AI is making them better. But still, I often just get really useless generic answers out of these and end up just wanting to talk to a real human. It felt to me like AI shouldn't just make chatbots marginally better at text responses, but that they should enable a new type of web assistant. Something that feels like you're talking to a human support agent who is co-browsing alongside you. Commandbar is building that user assistant. Companies embed it into their web app, mobile app, or website. And they get a fully generative chatbot that can give personalized responses that refer to a user's past chats, perform actions directly on behalf of the user, like looking up account info, and even start browsing alongside the user to show them how to do something, like a tour guide. It can also nudge users when they seem confused or frustrated. I love when I encounter Commandbar in websites. It's white labeled, but at this point I can tell right away. Commandbar already reaches more than 20 million end users with major customers like HashiCorp, Gusto, Freshworks, 6 Sense, and more. See for yourself at commandbar.com/MOZ or follow the link in the show notes. If you don't already subscribe to Turpentine's industry-leading newsletters like our new daily AI newsletter, Emergent Behavior, or Media Empires, you should. But that's not what I'm here to tell you about. The platform we use to power these newsletters is called Beehiiv, and it's excellent. First of all, it was started by the same early team who helped build Morning Brew into a $75 million newsletter business, and they built Beehiiv to offer that same powerful functionality to anyone sending emails. From essayists to business owners, the platform is beautiful, their text editor is intuitive, and they help you scale your audience with custom growth features. Beehiiv has powerful tools to help you monetize your content. You can easily launch paid subscriptions or pursue an advertising model. The Beehiiv platform will even connect you to premium brands to sponsor your newsletter. Not only do we use them, but thousands of the top newsletters in the world also use them, like Milk Road, Blockworks, the Lindy newsletter, and so many more. Beehiiv's founder hooked up Moment of Zen listeners with a sweet deal. Get 20% off for 3 months with code MOZ. Visit beehiiv.com, that's BEEHIIV.com, to get started.
In terms of, when I say the big thing, I don't mean the big policy difference. I mean the big difference in what people were actually experiencing during that time was inflation. That, maybe it was connected to COVID because of supply chain disruptions, but otherwise, it was indirectly connected to COVID because COVID relief spending was one thing that pumped up inflation. So COVID relief spending did pump up inflation, but I think one thing people don't understand is that the COVID relief spending that Trump did also pumped up inflation, just like the COVID relief spending that Biden did. And because it handed out a bunch of cash to people, and people during 2020, when they were like really scared of COVID, they put it in their bank accounts and they just let that cash sit. All right. And they paid down debts, which was good. And then they put cash in their bank account and let it sit. And then in December 2020, when Trump was still lame duck, Congress passed another supplementary bill to, CARES Act supplemental that was also fairly big. I think it was almost a $1 trillion. The original CARES Act was $2.2 trillion or 2.3, something like that. And I think then the CARES Act supplemental, I think, was 0.9. And then Biden came in and did one more bill that was $2.1 trillion. And so Biden actually spent less on COVID than Trump. COVID relief, I mean, all this like pandemic relief, extended unemployment insurance stuff. Biden spent it a little bit different. Biden did the expanded child tax credit, which I liked. Biden did the, bunch of healthcare subsidies, which I didn't like. And so Biden did some more of these things. But the extra cash that people had that made them go out and spend a lot of money on stuff, which pushed up prices, which fueled inflation. A lot of that was left over from 2020. And so I think that people forget that. People just look at the contemporaneous thing like, people spent this money in 2021. Who was president in 21? Biden. So it was because of Biden. But they had saved up some from Trump too. The question is, did Biden spend too much in 2021? And I'd say the answer to that is yes, he did. That was too much money to spend, both because of the deficit impact and because of the inflationary impact. So I think 2021, people were, it was to some degree an honest mistake because people in 2020 simply saved their money, right? When you gave them the money, they saved it. And there was no guarantee that people would run right out and spend it in 2021. They did, right? So they did run right out and spend it, but that was very different than what they would have done in 2020 because by 2021, even though the pandemic was still going on at the time, people were still dying. In fact, more people have died, more people died from COVID under Biden than under Trump. But we had waves of variants that had these huge spikes in death. In addition to the fact that when Biden took over, we were still in the middle of this the biggest wave of deaths, which happened when people like stopped social distancing and came out of their houses and mingled and weren't vaxxed yet. So we had 2.5 waves under Biden, and like maybe 1 to 2 waves under 1.5, 2 waves under Trump. So the point is that everybody thought we were still in pandemic land and that people were just going to save their money, and so we needed to give this big amount of money. It turns out that everyone was ready to go back to work. Everyone was ready to go back out and spend, even though they were still dying. But people were just like, fuck this. And so, which if you did what I did, and the minute the pandemic hit, you just went out and read 10 books about historical pandemics, you knew would happen, right? Like eventually people get tired of social distancing, and then there's a wave of death when they come back, but they don't care. And so like people just get tired of it, and they're just like, fuck it, I'll just die. So then that happened, and I think that people didn't realize it would happen, so people didn't realize how inflationary that would be. And people also didn't realize how inflationary the leftover cash from the CARES Act was going to be, because they hadn't seen that in action yet. And I didn't realize that. I think lots of people missed that. So, but that was a mistake on Biden's part. I think, yes, Biden spent too much. I say that Biden spent too much, and Trump probably did not spend too much. Biden shouldn't have done the healthcare subsidies. He should have just, he should have spent some, I think, but then maybe not quite that much. But, honestly, it wasn't like if you took away the excess spending, if you did what I thought would be a more appropriate level of spending to maintain the economic recovery, you still would have gotten inflation. You still would have gotten the supply chain snarls. You still would have gotten the leftover cash from the CARES Act. You still would have gotten the Russia-Ukraine invasion with that oil price spike in 22 that prolonged inflation. You would have gotten all those things anyway, even if Biden. So to say Biden caused inflation, he caused inflation to be, a point higher than it would otherwise have been, which is bad. That's a marginal effect. Like overall, we still would have had an inflationary era, overspending or no. So it was a marginal effect. So ultimately, I think that this is an ambiguous part of Biden's legacy. I'd say that, he didn't get it. He didn't hit it exactly perfect bullseye, but I don't think it was a big disaster. I think most of inflation would have happened anyway. Does that answer your question on the inflation front?
Yes. Now let's transition to industrial policy, trade.
Yeah. So here, it's interesting because we tend to think of Republicans and Democrats as canceling what each other do, but far more often there's continuity. So Clinton didn't come in and cancel all the stuff that Reagan and Bush had done. Clinton came in and extended it and gave it a Democratic flavor. He ended welfare, but he didn't end welfare, actually. He just ended the old welfare system and replaced it with a new cash-based one that actually works better. And Clinton did not, he partially reversed the Reagan tax cuts a little bit, but, that needed to be done to hold down the deficit. But ultimately he deregulated a lot, and even to a bad degree. So there was a lot of continuity there. In the same way, I think you saw a lot of continuity between Trump and Biden. I think Biden worked to implement concretely the things that Trump had talked about. So Trump is like, okay, you know what? Trade with China is actually not good for everybody. It's a threat. And we're going to use tariffs to stop it. Trump put tariffs up. They were tariffs that seemed big and important at the time, and everyone talked about them. But if you look at the economic impact of that, it was very small. And one reason it was small is because China's exchange rate depreciated to partially cancel out the tariffs. And another reason it was small is because China rerouted some of its exports to third countries like Vietnam. And part of the reason it was small is because ultimately it was small. It was not a high rate of tariffs. It was high compared to what it had been in the past, but it was not high in an absolute sense because Trump wasn't bold enough to, do 100% tariffs overnight or some crazy shit like that, right? He moved slowly and incrementally. Biden put up much higher tariffs on a targeted range of Chinese products, manufactured products, electric cars, batteries, chips, and things like that. Those tariffs are bigger, and those are going to have a bigger effect. And so Trump did export controls on a few Chinese companies, Huawei, and for a while ZTE, before he gave those up and canceled those. Biden did export controls on the entire Chinese chip industry. So Trump attempted to jawbone a company called Foxconn, manufacturer of phones and whatnot, into building a factory in Southwest Wisconsin. And it was always a farce. They claimed they were building the factory, and then they built some piddly nothing of a facility that didn't do anything. because really they were just, it was for show. And jawboning doesn't really do much. Biden did the CHIPS Act, which paid TSMC and Samsung to build actual factories here, which now are on track, and even TSMC is even ahead of schedule now, actually building factories in America, and not just factories for people to slap together phones, which is a job that ultimately is not going to be in America, but that's going to be in India. But then, a job like semiconductor jobs are much higher paying jobs, and constructing these things are high paid construction jobs. Anyway, these chips are things that we actually can build in America and do. And so that, and then those are the companies that do them. And, we don't want Foxconn I don't want a Foxconn factory in America. Have you seen a fucking Foxconn factory? I don't want that. I would feel ashamed to have Americans working at that kind of thing. And in fact, China should even feel ashamed of having Chinese people working at those Foxconn factories. They suck. Foxconn is a sucky company that treats its employees like crap. Sorry, Foxconn. I said that about you. You had the rash of suicides. Like, Chinese peasants were coming from the villages where they were like indigent peasants coming to, big Chinese cities to work, and they were committing suicide because the work was so crappy. You made farmers commit suicide. Like, Foxconn sucks. And rural Wisconsin is not a place that anyone's going to build cheap phones, right? That's just not going to happen. And certainly no one's going to do it because you yelled at them. It was just poorly conceived. And Trump had no strategy for industrial reshoring, and zero happened on his watch. And we were just sitting there laughing because nothing happened. Now something happened. Biden made a thing happen, and he did it with money, but also with, slowly changing our incentive policies to make it more possible to build factories, although that's been much slower than I'd like, but we've been doing some of that. And also, but more importantly, focusing on capital intensive manufacturing. So we can build chips here. We can even build batteries here. I think I'm bullish on battery factories in places that will allow them to be built, like Texas and Alabama and whatnot. But, I'm bullish on that. And so Biden picked the right things, and he picked the right method to encourage the things. Trump just, did nothing. And so, but Trump talked about it, which, Obama made a documentary about it, American Factory, and was sort of like that factory, that documentary ultimately was pessimistic on the chances of reshoring stuff. It's like Chinese people can build things Americans can't. That was the idea. Biden was like, I don't believe that. And Biden's team actually looked at what America can and can't build, realized that we can build capital intensive things if we simply allow them and provide the proper incentives, and we can do that sustainably. That was much better than what Obama was doing. Obama basically wrung his hands, did nothing, and gave up on reshoring manufacturing. He made a pessimistic documentary about how hard Chinese people work. And there was a big failure to engage. There was a big failure to look at Obama ultimately was not an industrial policy guy. He was a neoliberal guy. He was a guy who said comparative advantage, markets, prices, who can, the market decides, right? And ultimately we just have to give people more benefits because they're not able to compete with these Chinese workers.
Do you think if Trump wins that it would be a threat to the success that Biden has achieved here? Or would it just be a continuation?
I think it would. It would. One thing is because we've built factories for two kinds of things, which is chips and batteries and other electrical machinery like motors and things like that. Trump will try to cancel the latter because, it's a thing about Biden that he can cancel because the Republicans view green energy as sort of a culture war thing instead of this is actually the future of technology thing. I want to go on a giant rant sometime about how Americans have been very foresighted on almost every technological revolution. We saw AI coming before anyone else did. We saw the internet coming before anyone else did. We saw solar coming before anyone else did. We saw it's hard to name a technological revolution that we missed that other people saw coming before we did. But there's one, which is the shift to batteries. We did not see the battery revolution coming. We missed that. We slept on it. We got surprised by China on that one. We got leapfrogged. We were taken by surprise on the importance of batteries. And that's the one. That's the one thing where China got ahead of us and realized that this was going to be a big thing before we realized.
Why did that happen?
That's a first.
Now is as good a time as any to
name another thing that we were behind on. But first let's try to think of a historical precedent. When did that happen? Who else lapped us like that? Nazi Germany realized that jets and aerospace, like jet fighters, like, and like big rockets were going to be a big thing. We got lapped on rockets. And then as a result, we were playing catch up even with the Soviets, in rockets until the mid 60s, at which point we took the lead. So we got lapped that time. Like nuclear, we were ahead of the curve. We were also ahead of the curve on restricting nuclear, which is bad, but we knew it was a thing. Like we didn't get caught with our pants down. Semiconductors, we were way ahead of the curve on that. Like way ahead of everybody else. Like, what's another technological revolution? I'm trying to think. Like, Japan was never really ahead of us on anything. They caught up fast and they executed some things better. And they invented a lot of things. Japan invented a lot of things, but in terms of seeing the things coming, maybe digital cameras.
Are we ahead on some,
like, maybe I guess Japan saw
futuristic biotech stuff, like the gene editing stuff is
No, that was us. We were ahead. Human Genome Project, we were ahead. CRISPR, us in Europe, we invented most of that stuff. No, so biotech, we were way ahead. Yeah, it's really hard to think of. United States is usually way ahead. Like, sometimes they're too ahead. People are like, oh, Jimmy Carter putting solar panels on the White House. They were insanely inefficient. Well, of course they were inefficient. It was a marketing thing. But it showed that, like, decades before solar became viable, we were thinking about it, right? We were ahead on fracking. No one else could even do that. China doesn't even know how to do it today. Like, mRNA vaccines, we're so ahead on that. America is almost always ahead on things. And then batteries, we just totally slept on that. Like, batteries? What can you do with a battery? And then, like, it's a thing I put in my Sony Walkman. And then, like, China's like, we're going to use batteries for everything. We're going to put them in drones and robots and cars and even airplanes. China has now an airplane that flies on batteries. So cool. We don't have that. And they have the motors to match because China has these really good magnets and really good motors. And yeah, it pisses me off that we fucking slept on that. I slept on that until I met Sam D'Amico of Impulse. It was randomly, it was this, that told me batteries are a big deal, and I wouldn't have known but for him. And now I understand that batteries are like everything. Why do we get lapped? I don't know, man. I'm going to look into this. I don't know why we got lapped.
Hey, we'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Fast forward to the end of 2024. Think about your goals. What can you do right now to give yourself the best chance of succeeding? If learning a new language is on your list, you absolutely need to check out Babbel. Babbel offers a range of learning tools, self-study app lessons, live classes, and even podcasts, which have always been my favorite way to learn. Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and others continue to prove Babbel is better. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. Babbel isn't just a game to kill time and make you feel like you're learning a language. It's not overly academic or rigid either. It's all about learning language for the real world. Babbel stands out because it's designed by real people using a modern conversational teaching approach. It's not always easy, nothing worth doing ever is, but it's straightforward and designed to help you start speaking in just 3 weeks. With Babbel, I was able to brush up on my intermediate Spanish to ramp up for travel to Argentina last year, and was able to set clear goals based on how much time each week I wanted to practice. Join millions of Babbel language learners across all age groups. Here's a special limited time offer for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners, at babbel.com/zen. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/zen, spelled BABBEL.com/zen. Rules and restrictions may apply. Hey all, Erik Torenberg here. I'm hearing more and more that founders want to get profitable and do more with less, especially with engineering. Listen, I love your 30-year-old ex-FANG senior software engineer as much as the next guy, but honestly, I can't afford them anymore. Founders everywhere are trying to turn to global talent, but boy, is it a hassle to do at scale, from sourcing to interviewing to on-the-ground operations and management. That's why I teamed up with Sean Lanahan, who's been building engineering teams in Vietnam at a very high level for over 5 years to help you access global engineering without the headache. Squad, Sean's new company, takes care of sourcing, legal compliance, and local HR for global talent so you don't have to. With teams across Asia and South America, we can cover you no matter which time zone you operate in. Their engineers follow your process and use your tools. They work with React, Next.js, or your favorite front-end frameworks. And on the back end, they're experts at Node, Python, Java, and anything under the sun. Full disclosure, it's going to cost more than the random person you found on Upwork that's doing 2 hours of work per week but billing you for 40. But you'll get premium quality at a fraction of the typical cost. Our engineers are vetted top 1% talent and actually working hard for you every day. Increase your velocity without amping up burn. Head to choosesquad.com and mention Turpentine to skip the waitlist.
So Trump, let's get back to Biden and Trump. Biden did the stuff Trump said he was going to do and then that Trump did not do. Trump's rhetoric was important. It was an important big change from Obama. And I was writing, in Bloomberg at the time, which was, if you said something nice about Trump at Bloomberg, you better be prepared to defend it and have it sit in the queue for a week. But I said, look, this is a necessary thing. Trump did these this is a shift that needed to be made, and I think that was that, but he didn't. I was like, well, Trump said these things, but he didn't do any of these things. And that was what Bloomberg, the extremely anti-Trump publication, because, Tim O'Brien hates Trump more than anyone in the world hates Trump. Tim O'Brien's the guy recruiting to Bloomberg. He's head of Bloomberg Opinion, and he hates Trump. He wants Trump to pay. And so
Yeah, that's a high bar.
Anyway, Trump was a necessary rhetorical shift, but rhetorical shift is not enough. You can't just change the rhetoric and then the nation just hops to it and does exactly what you said. That's not how it works. The president is not a psychic who he's not like the emperor in Warhammer, right? Who just thinks these thoughts and the power of his psychic brain just resonates throughout the galaxy and then everyone does what he says, right? That's not how God Emperor Trump was a joke meme. That's not how shit works. You have to actually do the policies, and Biden did the policies with some Republican help, I should add. The CHIPS Act was fairly bipartisan. The IRA was not, which was dumb because America just feels like getting lapped on batteries and feels like denying that batteries are a thing. But they eked the IRA through, and but the CHIPS Act was bipartisan, and I think that it won't be canceled by Trump. But yeah, so Biden Trump was a man of rhetoric and Biden was a man of action.
And just to remind our audience, that shift needed to be made largely for national security reasons, right? More so than economic.
Yeah, national security reasons. Yeah. I mean, there's an element of, industrialism of we've got to get control of this new industry, right? AI is a big deal. We need to make the chips that make the AI or we won't have the best AI. So there is that, right? Electric cars, we at least want to be a player in electric cars and not be completely left behind by China. We got to play catch up on that. There is an element of industrialism, of just industrial national competition. We want the industry, right? So we can have the jobs, so we can have the wages, so we can have the income. So the money comes in and then gets spread around. AI is be a big export industry, and then the money will come in, and then, the money will come. Korea will pay OpenAI for its AI, and then OpenAI will pay Rune, and Rune will go out to the bar in Hayes Valley, and he will spend the money at the bar, and he will buy me some nachos. Thank you, Rune. And you should really come to those bar nights, by the way. You should come. Hayes Valley is a great place for bars. And then, other people will pay Nader Khalil and Steph Scher and our other friends, and then they will spend their money locally, and then that money will circulate throughout the economy, and that's called a local multiplier effect. Because the nachos, and the, whatever else stuff that they buy in Hayes Valley, that will circulate around. An example close to home. But so America wants to be strong in these industries of tomorrow, but I'd say that national security is the big one by far. That's the overarching reason for these things. America must have this technological edge because it helps us be secure. It's not all we need. We still need to build large numbers of regular basic bitch missiles, right? But we need our missiles to be a little bit better than their missiles too, and that really helps us. And we need to make life hard for them in terms of beating us on the battlefield so that we can continue to maintain the freedoms that we know and love, to, argue about pointless crap online and wear silly hats and, sit around in our pajamas blogging. And that is what allows us to do that military edge. And so, I think Trump may or may not see things in those terms. I think that he probably did in an intuitive level, when he thinks America's strong, probably the ideas of military and industrial strength are very mixed up in his mind, but that's fine because they are mixed up in real life too. They're not super separable in real life either. And so I think that was fine. But the fact is that Trump didn't do it. You got to do the thing, man. You can't just say the thing. You
Can't just
got
be
to
the ideas guy. Let's segue into foreign policy.
Right. I say that as a man who spends all day just saying the thing instead of doing the thing,
Yeah, but you're not president.
hoping that someone else will do it. But like the president is not the blogger in chief, right? The president is more valuable than me.
Yes. Let's segue to the comparison on foreign policy, or just how do we think Biden will be remembered on foreign policy?
Unfortunately, I think that Biden's foreign policy legacy, people will remember him badly because of the Afghanistan withdrawal. And I think that's a mistake because of several things. Number one, the Afghanistan withdrawal was agreed to by Trump. Trump sat down with the Taliban in 2020 when everyone was paying attention to frickin' COVID, and Trump signed an agreement with the Taliban saying, we will withdraw on this date. The United States will completely withdraw from the country and hand it over to you on this date. Trump signed that agreement. That agreement exists. America signed an agreement with the Taliban to hand Afghanistan over to them. And we did. And we did it on the date that we said we'd do, and that date was during Biden's administration. Trump kicked the can to Biden. Now, what Biden could have done, had he wanted, is say, you know what, I'm tearing up this thing. And the Taliban would have attacked and fought us, and we would have had to surge troops there and spend more years hashing out another agreement. But instead, Biden's like, okay, we said we were going to withdraw on this day. We'll do it. Bye. Trump signed that agreement. Trump set the timetable for the withdrawal. Who knows that? Did you know that?
No, I didn't know that.
You didn't know that. Did you know? But you knew that before you came to this recording session because you read it in my post. But you didn't read it before you read it in a No Opinion blog post, right? I knew that but only because I just read an unhealthy amount of news. And almost nobody knows that to this day. They think that this was Biden's sudden decision to do this. Trump signed an agreement with the Taliban to withdraw on that date. Biden got blamed for it. But it was something we needed to do. Trump was right to sign the agreement, and Biden was right to hold to it. They were both right. I don't criticize Trump for this. I don't criticize Biden for this either. But Biden will take all the blame for it instead of the guy who actually agreed to do it. And that's stupid. That's the news cycle. That's the media. That's just natural lack of attention. Oh well. So that's what happened, and that's what will happen. We needed to get out of Afghanistan. So another thing people don't realize is that we withdrew 90% of our troops from Afghanistan after bin Laden was killed. Most of the Afghanistan withdrawal happened under Barack Obama. And it was good that it happened because once we killed bin Laden and we killed Mullah Omar, later we killed Ayman al-Zawahiri, who didn't even matter that much because everyone hated him. We got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and we got a whole dozens of other guys that whose names you wouldn't know, and they sound weird in like Central Asian or Middle Eastern or something like to you, and you wouldn't know who those motherfuckers are. And we got those too. We got them all. We got the guys who did 9/11. We killed them or tortured them for the rest of their life and then killed them, which I don't agree with, but we did that to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. He was the principal architect of that whole idea. We tortured him for years, and I think we killed him, or he may even be still alive, screaming in a room somewhere. But we did that, and when we got all those dudes, and then what the fuck were we in Afghanistan for? Like, are we going to babysit Afghanistan until a whole bunch of drug crazed tribal gang guys decide to become Japan? Was that going to happen? No. What people don't understand about the Japan occupation is that although the American occupation did do some important things that helped Japan along, primarily Japan was Japan. Like, Japan is the way it is because of them, not because of us. Like, we did land reform, right? And we did land reform, and we smacked down the power of big companies, which allowed industrial policy to succeed because the bureaucracy gained power at the expense of companies. We smacked down the military, but that would have happened because of the war anyway. And basically, we did some beneficial things for Japan that helped them grow fast after but overall, like, Japan's social stability happened because of Japan. That's just a Japan thing. And Korea too. We helped Korea along a bit on social stability, but ultimately, like, Korea was a dictatorship for many years, and then Korea's transition to a democracy happened because of Korea, because of a whole bunch of, hippie Christian kids who died in the streets for democracy in the 1980s, right? And Reagan may have put his thumb on the scale in like 87, but then basically Korea did this, and we helped them along a little bit. We cannot just say by fiat, you become a democracy. I mean, we saw what happened in Iraq, where we basically said, okay, you are now a democracy. Iraq is now nominally a democracy, right? In reality, it's controlled by just the same old kind of thugs that it always was, but marginally less effective than Saddam Hussein's thugs. But nominally it's a democracy, but you can't instill you can't create the deep institutions with 10,000 troops. 10,000 troops can't do that. We needed to withdraw from Afghanistan, especially because the actual military threats to us are elsewhere, primarily China. We needed to pivot away, and we did that, and that was smart. We should have immediately let in, hundreds and hundreds, thousands, or even millions, really hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees who helped us. Biden didn't do it because politically it was, scary, because people were scared of a border flood. Ironically, Biden ignored the actual border flood that happened. That was bad. So that was a mistake. But otherwise, the Afghanistan withdrawal was done well. And because of that agreement that Trump signed with the Taliban didn't kill any of our guys on the way out. Some random other Islamist came up and then killed some of our guys on the way out with a random bombing in an airport, right? The Taliban then went and executed all those guys for us and for them, because they don't like those guys. Those are rivals. Like, those are just chaos agents. Our withdrawal was incredibly orderly. It was not the fucking fall of Saigon. We did not sign an agreement with the North Vietnamese. We signed an agreement, we did, but not that. We didn't sign an agreement to hand the South Vietnam over to them. They did that themselves. With the Taliban, we signed an agreement basically to hand the country over. And so we did. And the Taliban didn't kill any of our guys, not even one American troop. After fighting us for so many years, they didn't kill even one of us. That was because Trump signed an agreement with them. And Biden followed the agreement. People are idiots. They don't understand this. They're like, humiliating defeat. It's like, no, quitting your babysitting job is not a humiliating defeat. All right, Afghanistan, you will now babysit yourself. But the Taliban that are now in power are not the Taliban who planned 9/11. That was a faction within the Taliban that we killed. Mullah Omar and his close inner circle were killed, and the Taliban faction that took over were Taliban faction more friendly to us. Nobody knows this. Nobody cares. But I know, I care. I will remember that Biden did the right thing on Afghanistan and nobody else will. So, fuck it. Ukraine. Biden did exactly the right thing on Ukraine, because if not for Biden, Ukraine wouldn't exist now. We wouldn't be having the discussion about Ukraine. If not for Biden, Ukraine would still have a "the" in front of it, all right? It would be the Ukraine. It would be a Russian territory. And Russia would be rounding up every adult male from Ukraine into an army to attack the Baltics and Poland right now.
And I guess the counter to that, which you don't sympathize with probably, is, but just to name it, is that maybe there's a world in which this conflict would have been prevented in the first place, and that we somehow provoked Russia. I'm just trying to steel man the counter.
Well, no. I mean, that would not have happened. So one thing people don't understand is that the Ukrainian army, the reason the Ukrainian army was able to stop the Russians is not just because of the equipment that we rushed there, although that was decisive. That was important. We rushed javelins and HIMARS and all those other weapons there. But the Ukrainian army had been trained by the United States Army for years. Who do you think was president when the Ukrainian army was trained by the American army? Was it Biden? It mostly wasn't Obama. It was under Trump. Under Trump, the United States was training the Ukrainian army to fight the Russians, and the Russians knew this. So, of course, Putin's an old man. He's going to die. COVID made him realize he was mortal. Putin wants to restore the Russian Empire. You can't do that without conquering Ukraine. He was going to go for it. I do not think Trump in the White House would have stopped him. I think Trump probably would have done the same thing Biden did. I think Trump would have rushed all those weapons to Ukraine. I do not think he would have dilly-dallied. I think that there was no, later MAGA people became more sort of anti-Ukraine, pro-Russia. That was after, months and months and years of Russian propagandizing. That was not true in 2022. In 2022, early 2022, Republicans were as pro-Ukrainian as Democrats. That was the reality. We forget these things, right? We forget that Trump, Democrats were suspicious of the Trump vaccine at the beginning. We forget that Democrats are the one downplaying the importance of COVID at the beginning because they thought it would be racist against Asian people to talk about COVID. We forget these shifts. We forget that Balaji Srinivasan was the guy yelling about COVID. We forget that it was right-wingers yelling about COVID in the early days. We forget these political shifts because, we psyop ourselves into forgetting that these shifts, how fast these shifts happen. Eurasia has always been at war with East Asia or whatever, right? So anyway, that shift happened. I think Trump would have done the same thing as Biden. I don't think he would have done the sanctions as much, but maybe that probably was what required a little more economic policy like muscle than Trump's people probably were willing to exert or able to exert. But I think that the rushing of arms to Ukraine would have happened under Trump. Trump would have done it. It would have worked the same. I think we have to give credit to Biden, but we have to also say Trump probably would have done it. The idea that like Republicans abandoned Ukraine, like that's recent. That's really recent. That's Tucker Carlson, chipping away in the service of his not Russian masters, but the Russians that he sucks up to for years. And so, yes, I think Biden saved Ukraine. And now, of course, some hawks criticize Biden. They're like, oh, he didn't feed in the weapons fast enough, right? He didn't give them permission to strike within Russia, all this stuff. He held the Ukrainians back too much. Jake Sullivan, they really blame for this. I don't know whether that's true. I suspect it's not. And I suspect the reason we did it was because we were properly scared that Russia would go nuclear if we escalated too fast, too quick. And we slowly escalated to boil the Russian frog so that Russia got used to this level of aid and then didn't launch nukes because of it. So we just increased incrementally because nuclear war is scary. We don't want, like, if Russia nuked Kyiv, if Russia just nuked Ukraine, that wouldn't hurt us, but it would be really scary and would inaugurate a new nuclear arms race all around the world where everyone built up their nuclear stocks, including all third countries like, Korea goes nuclear, Japan goes nuclear, Poland goes nuclear the day of, like you nuke Kyiv and then everyone nukes up all over the world. Scary world, right? So I think we wanted to prevent that. We weren't worried about Russia nuking us. Russia is not going to start global conflagration World War III over Ukraine. Like they're not going to do that, right? Because then they die. Like restoring the Russian Empire is pointless if the Russian Empire is a parking lot. like we'll fucking that gingerbread candy castle building you've got, like that's the parking lot for our new Walmart, where you can only buy like irradiated, very large boxes of irradiated cornflakes. Russia does not want that. That's not what they want. But they might have nuked Ukraine because Ukraine doesn't have nukes and couldn't nuke back. They could just they could flatten Kyiv. They could turn Kyiv into a parking lot. And what would we do? Are we going to start World War III over them nuking Kyiv? No, we're not. So they could do that. And we wanted to stop them from doing it. And it would be a really scary world if they did do it. So we drip fed stuff into Ukraine to stop the Russians gradually. And it worked really well. Again, I'm more positive on this than a lot of hawkish people who think, including some Republican hawks like Tom Cotton and John Cornyn, right? Who think we should have just it's go time, 1985, fold a gap, let's go, Soviet Union, let's beat your ass. Like they were like that. I think Jake Sullivan did the right thing. He was smart. Oh, but on foreign policy, Biden's big thing was that he stepped up to China more than Trump did. He strengthened the Quad, this alliance with India and Japan and Australia, but primarily India. He worked with Japan. So Japan is boosting its military spending like crazy now. And he worked with them on that. Biden negotiated for our bases to come back to the Philippines. People don't even know what the fuck this is. Philippines? What is that? That's where DJs come from. No, Philippines is this military important country, right? And also DJs come from there, but that's not the point. The point is that Philippines is next to Taiwan. And we colonized the Philippines. It was one of the very few places that Americans colonized, but we colonized them and we, had a guerrilla war against multiple insurgencies in the Philippines in which we killed 1 million Filipinos. And then we treated them rather badly, but not as badly as Japan treated them when they took over. But then afterwards, when Philippines got independence from us, who had promised to give independence and then dragged our feet, from Japan, whom we kicked out, when the Philippines got their independence, they kicked out our military bases at Subic Bay and, our other military bases. We had to get our military bases out of the Philippines because they were like, well, you were colonizers, blah, blah, blah. Ultimately, they were still friendly to us, but then they couldn't, there was this revolutionary sort of politics, domestic politics that made them kick out our bases. Well, that meant we didn't have any bases near Taiwan. Well, now we do again because China threatened the Philippines. Basically, China's been taking territory from the Philippines and Trump sat there and did nothing while China seized Scarborough Shoal. China just seized some maritime territory from the Philippines, and Trump sat there and did dick all. Trump's like he did nothing, and then Biden stepped in and he's like, okay, we're going to help you. We're going to help you maintain control of this maritime territory and combat China's salami slicing tactic in a very effective way. The Philippines, now the second Thomas Shoal, the Philippines has successfully defended that because of Biden. It didn't go the way it did under Trump. It changed because Biden stepped up. And, when I say Biden, I mean his administration, obviously, the people he appointed. Now we have military bases in the Philippines again, and those will help us to defend Taiwan if we choose to do so. And they will be a deterrent to China. So Biden did all these things much more active in Asia than Trump did. Biden pivoted to Asia in a way that Trump did not. Trump yelled at China a lot, and Biden actually started laying the groundwork to thwart them and contain them. No one likes to use the word containment because it's a scary word, but really that's what Biden set us up to do, and Trump kind of ignored.
That's a good overview on foreign policy. We have time for maybe one more for this episode. Should we focus on immigration, or is there somewhere else where you think it's most important to get into Biden's legacy?
Yes, I think immigration is Biden's big fuck up. So on legal immigration, Biden was great. He increased paths for high-skilled immigrants, our friends. They processed more green cards. They did great on legal immigration. On illegal immigration, they totally dropped the fucking ball. Because what happened is that there's this loophole in our asylum law that allows you to illegally cross the border, turn yourself into the Border Patrol, claim asylum, and be entitled to an asylum hearing, just as if you had lawfully presented yourself at a port of entry. You cannot get penalized for illegally crossing the border in terms of asylum things. That's our law. Trump basically made a bunch of rules to flout that law and keep people out, and the court struck them down. Biden resisted doing the same. Biden resisted calling to change the basic asylum law. Biden resisted doing anything about it. He just ignored it. For 2.5 years, he ignored the asylum flood, and it just got worse and worse and worse. I think they sort of thought that COVID would put a stop to it. I think they thought that because the asylum people stopped coming during COVID, because basically COVID, everyone was just sitting around doing nothing. Biden ignored the problem, and it just got worse and worse until people got really mad. And the Republican governors were very smart about this. They sent busloads of these migrants up to blue cities like New York that were now forced to take care of them. And of course, everything's more expensive in New York, and the taxpayers got really mad. Everyone's like, why are we taking care of these guys? And so the giant anti-immigration backlash in America because of the fucking asylum flood that Biden ignored. And so eventually Biden's like, okay, we'll stop it. They re-implemented essentially identical policies to Trump, which have now mostly stopped the border flood, which is another thing almost no one knows right now, but it'll take a while for it to filter through the consciousness. But Biden imitated Trump's measures, and the same result has happened, which is that they've stanched the flow. No one's talking about changing the asylum law. I complain about this all the time. But basically, Biden was incredibly belated on this. He should have done this years ago, but I don't know whether he wanted to draw a contrast between himself and Trump, or whether they thought COVID would just handle this forever and now it was done forever and they just slept on it, or whether or not there were Democratic pressure groups saying, like, you got to let him in. I don't know what the hell was going on, but this is Biden's big fuck up in his, more than the debt. The debt's like number 2, right? Like the debt fuck up is big. The student loan cancellation was dumb. The healthcare subsidies were too much. And the debt is unmanageable, and someone's going to have to do something about that. But I can at least see, the other side there. We at least got some benefits. This asylum flood stuff, the asylum flood doesn't hurt our country economically as much as people think, but it doesn't benefit it that much either. And it's primarily neutral. And basically, we should have been handling this. We should have been, creating a guest worker program, expanding H-1A to take all the guest workers we need, and then cracking down hard on illegal border crossing. And that would have worked. That's what Eisenhower did. It would have worked. And we didn't do it. Biden didn't get out ahead of it. Instead, his administration totally slept on it. And here we are.
There is some more to say on the election stuff, but I think this is a good overview of the Biden legacy on the economy, foreign policy, and some of the relating issues like industrial policy, immigration, et cetera. And we'll get into other topics in the future. We'll also do a roundup or mailbag episode very soon. So please keep submitting your questions to the email in the comments. But Noah, as always, another great episode. And until next time.
All right. Until next time.
Hey everyone, Erik here. At Turpentine, we're building the first media outlet for tech people by tech people. We're the network behind the show you're listening to right now. We have a slate of hit shows across a range of topics and industries, from our AI and investing cluster of podcasts to shows that drive the conversation in tech with the most interesting thinkers, founders, investors, and influencers, like Econ 102 with Noah Smith. We're launching new shows every week, and we're looking for industry-leading sponsors. If you think that might be you and your company, email me at erikaturpentine.co. That's ERIK at turpentine.co, and let's partner together.